Hi, good morning, everybody who's joining us here in the room, as well as good morning, maybe afternoon, to those who are joining us from around the globe via Zoom. My name is Amani Aljak, and it's my great pleasure on behalf of myself and the Consortium on Gender Security and Human Rights to welcome you all to this talk. Today's talk is by Dr. Melkor Quick Hall. Is being run as a hybrid event with live audience here, as well as participants who are joining us from around the world. We would first like to acknowledge that UMass Boston and its surrounding communities are based on unceded land of Massachusetts, Pawtucket, and Nipmuc indigenous groups. And we want to honor their lives and acknowledge the enduring relationship that their traditional territories had in many ways ripped away from indigenous people, and the land was given to non-indigenous groups. And this one was done through a very violent and unicidal forced removal that encompasses disposition, displacement, and countless individual and communities being kind of evicted from their homelands. While acknowledging this is a first step, but I think that it would be important for all of us to follow it by action building solidarity, and particularly compacting the structural and physical violence that indigenous groups continue to endure as we speak right now. So while people are still joining us, I would like to take a few minutes to just tell you what are the structure of our event today. Dr. Quick Hall will talk, and after that we'll take questions from the participants here as well as in Zoom. So we encourage you to kind of state your name before, and also for the Zoom audience, the chat room is open right now, and you can start kind of asking questions throughout the form. And we'll get a chance for the Zoom audience to open it up also at the end of the event and interact with them around any questions. There is a short survey that will pop up for the Zoom participants. Please take the time to fill it. And for our participants here in the room, there is a survey on your seats. Please take the time to fill it out before you leave. This event is recorded, just to alert everybody, and the video will be available on the consortium website. Right. Finally, I would like to thank many of the UMass departments and programs that have collaborated and generously contributed and co-sponsored this event today. And many of the consortium gender security and human rights kind of events are very collaborative. They are very kind of homegrown, and they reach goes way far beyond some of the departments that we are mentioning. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce you to our speaker. Dr. Quick Hall is a popular education and community-based researcher currently working at a postdoctoral fellow for Wellesley College Carceller Collaboratory, and the education director of Global Village Farms. She's currently professional work advances abolitionist and food sovereignty futures that are long-siding communities. Dr. Quick Hall has many publications. Like one of her major kind of contribution is a book of naming transnational Black feminist frameworks, Writing in Darkness, and she is a co-editor with Gay Kirk of Mapping Gender Ecologies, Engaging with and Beyond eco-womanism and ecofeminism. Welcome, Dr. Kirkall.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Okay, I can't tell if the mic is, I'm speaking into the mic. Is that better? No? This? Wow, okay, I have to lean forward a bit. All right, so one, I want to invite, as I lean forward, I invite some of you who are in the back part of the room to move forward. So and feel free to get up even while I'm talking. If you're moved, it's okay if you have to leave early, if you have to get up during the talk. I just want to say that my way of engaging, what it means to be well, first of all, can you raise your hand if you've heard the phrase popular educator before? Those are timid hands. Yes. So part of what it means when I say that I'm a popular educator is that I recognize that in a room full of people that while there may be someone who identifies professionally as an expert in an area, that I think that everyone has something to contribute to the conversation. And so I'm really looking to learn from the people who are in the room. There are a range of people who have experiences that which I'm not familiar, who can teach me something about food sovereignty, about your connection to water and land. And so I'm going to be pausing at different points during the presentation to hear from you. And so it facilitates that. I came in after the room was set up, but I almost removed the chairs in the back of the room just to encourage that. Also often in that kind of mode, things are more in a circle than in the current setup, but I'm going to share in this mode, and I hope that you all will sort of come a little bit closer as we move forward. So I'm going to share my screen. So you'll just pause, be patient with me for just a moment while I do that. I think I should be able to do it. The person who's currently sharing may have to stop sharing, or maybe they won't. Maybe this will just all work out perfectly. So I am both professionally at this moment, a postdoctoral fellow at Wellesley College's Anti-Carceral Collaboratory, which is a Mellon-funded initiative that's designed to end prisons. So feel free to ask me questions about that if you have those questions later. I'm also education director at a place called Global Village Farms, which I'll talk about a little bit later, which is in the central part of the state. If anybody is familiar with the state and knows the Worcester area, it's in Grafton, Massachusetts. And so those are the affiliations I have here, but I have many in alternating and changing and rotating affiliations. So where I'll start is where I began. So this is a picture of my grandmother, Mrs. Beulah Quick, who passed away in September of 2023 at the age of 102. And so in this particular moment, when I'm thinking about legacy and I'm thinking about transnational legacies, I'm thinking about the people who I'm connected to. I'm thinking about my own grandmother and her life. And there are also a couple of other pictures here. I consider myself having transnational family, and those horizons take me to several different countries. One is Honduras, I'll talk about that a lot during this talk. The second place is Senegal. And so one of the pictures here, the woman in the red shirt and the green little girl leaning against her is a mother and daughter who I met over a decade ago when I was studying dance, traditional West African dance in Senegal, West Africa. And we've sort of been family since then. Aida is the mother and the daughter is named after me. And then the other picture you see is another little girl in Tanzania who's named after me. And my first book is Naming a Transnational Black Feminist Framework. And I talk about the importance of naming in the process, how much time, how much ritual is involved in naming something. Often when someone gives a child your name, it comes with some responsibility. It's not just to, you know, to make you feel sort of, you know, self-centered or more, you know, to get you into a sort of ego situation. The idea is more about your commitment to the family and to that particular child. And so I was really sort of honored to have these relationships and continue those relationships. And also before my grandmother died, but my grandmother wasn't able to see it. That middle picture is my namesake taking care of her newborn sister, my mother's namesake. And so I just wanted to, I always think about that now, about the, you know, how we do naming, what it means, what we call ourselves, how we identify. And so that's where I'm starting. And also, I'm going to talk about food traditions, in particular women's food traditions, and say a little bit more about what I mean by that. Food sovereignty principles, transnational Black feminism, which I've already mentioned once, Black Indigenous solidarity, and I'm going to end where I started, which is with transnational legacies. So, yes, I think it's great that people are starting to share. I'm going to, you know, don't think of it as coming to an end. You'll continue these conversations, hopefully beyond them. But I wonder if I can get maybe 2 people in the room who are willing to share, and you can either share a piece of your story or you can share something about what it felt like to share with somebody else or listen to somebody else's story. Okay. And do we have okay. Can I move the mic or? Okay.
I just told.
It's weird, right?
That means my classmates that I'm Dominican, so like every day it's just like rice and beans, I'm Dominican. And I thought, like, oh yeah, it's like a tradition. But it's like my grandma thinks that the only way you can get nutrition if you have like rice and beans at 12 o'clock. And if you don't eat, you're gonna die or die. So then I've been saying like, not everybody likes rice meat. But it's like, I was thinking of like plantain. It's really good. I haven't heard of a single Dominican that was plantain and like cheese as salami, so I think that's like a culture. Like,
Nice. Thank you for sharing. And while the mic is going, who else raised their hand or just, yeah, here and there?
So I shared with Marla about hospital, but us, I don't know, a tradition. So, back when every Friday, every single Friday. Huge bowl of couscous, like huge, like feed like at least 15 people. Every Friday we all make separate bowl, give it to people on the street, or we give it to like the guards at the front, or just neighbors, like anybody. So I think it's a tradition, I know a lot of Muslim families do that. It's a huge like hospitality type of tradition, but yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I love when food is used to communicate other things, you know, well, like there are certain dishes that people, you know, mean they're being welcome into a particular place. Also, I love rice and beans. But I just, over here.
Yeah, so I was talking to my friend Will about, on my dad's side, he was born in Houston, Jamaica, on a farm, so that was very fundamental kind of, right? Harvesting land, growing up land, being with the land. And I was just kind of like exploring and like reflecting on that period. Obviously, like I wasn't born there, I was born here, but you know, my dad would talk very fondly about growing sugarcane or having goats around on his family still bought, of land and just, yeah, it just got me in like a reflective mindset, cause like I don't really think about it too much when we have like the question, it can really kind of do a lot to kind of retextualize maybe, just kind of get your brain moving, so enjoy the question.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. It's really interesting when we have someone who's close to us, like I feel my godmother grew up on a farm and I didn't. And just thinking about later on when I became more involved in thinking about my relationship to food, how it changed my relationship to those people and their willingness to share stories with me. And I see we have lots of stories, but there will be other opportunities to share. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about is, let's see. There we go. Is two women's groups. You see the picture on my left with where you can see that the women are sort of inside a structure. Is Lucha y Esperanza, which is a group in Punta Piedra, Honduras, and that's a group that I came to know a while ago when I was doing dissertation field work in the region about Areba work. Areba is the Garifuna word for what is often translated into English as cassava bread. And so this is one of the groups of women who make that traditional food product in the Garifuna community. And then the other picture is a group called Tabasamu, which translates into English as smile, Swahili word. And that's a multi-ethnic group of women there who do a number of different things, including through this project, are supported in working on, we're supported in working on their gardens, community gardens, family gardens, and talking about food sovereignty. So I'm just gonna say, talk a little bit about this project. So as a Centennial Fellow, and this is an extension of the Fulbright program. So some of you have probably heard of Fulbright, heard of the Institute of International Education. And so if you have a Fulbright, then you're sort of permanently in a community of folks that has access to other kinds of opportunities. And so through the opportunity to apply for this fellowship, I decided that I wanted to connect the work of these two groups, that I wanted them to see each other and be in relationship in a way that was unlikely otherwise going to happen because of the distance, because of the language barriers. And so I did that. I would send them pictures of what was happening in the other place, and they would, joke about how it looked very similar, that, they were kind of like their cousins across the water. And so in the picture, I'll go what is from my left to right, and I'm not sure if things are reversed for people online, but the picture where you see one of my tias holding up a machete is a picture of the group Lucha y Esperanza out in the fields working the land together. Similar, the next picture is them working the cassava fields. You have a family garden in that third picture, which is in Tanzania, Mwanza, Tanzania. And then you have a woman who's just gotten access to pipe water, her own home, piped access to water at her home, which is extremely important for a number of reasons: washing, gardening, that kind of thing. And so the money from the fellowship allowed me to be in relationship with those two organizations and projects. And what was important to be thinking about was how, even though it was designed to advance food sovereignty in both locations, the work of each location was quite different. So Lucha y Esperanza was focused on renovating the molino, which is where they both strain the cassava root of the liquid that is poisonous, and also they grind it down. So they have machines. You see them sort of gathered around a machine there where a woman is taking out the ground cassava, And then they use a car jack sort of that's connected to other containers, to some machinery in order to squeeze it out after it's been ground. The woman is sifting the flour that's used to sift flour there. And then the woman on the other side is preparing, just setting up the final product, which is a crispy flatbread that's about the size of a small table. And so they were really interested in renovating that and, putting in a bathroom, getting it set up so that they could spend more time in there as a community space. They were interested in promoting Areba work so that other people outside of the Garifuna community would know about it. There's certainly people call a nostalgia market of people who travel from the diaspora and will still come back and get it, especially at holidays around Easter and Christmas. And then also they were very much committed to celebrating mothers. Every Mother's Day, I'm invited to celebrate with them by supporting some kind of celebration, a cake or a meal or something like that. So that's one of the groups. The other group had very different priorities. So one of the things is that they were experiencing a drought, so very different than the experiences in Punta Piedra. The group in Mwanza was focused on getting water access. They're in a city where it was important for them to have piped access to their homes. They were focused on supporting women's businesses. So the picture where you see the green bottles at the bottom, they're making a liquid soap there. The picture where they are holding up a sign, the second photo where they're holding up a sign, they're celebrating International Women's Day. So they were very much into thinking about women's solidarity and women in other parts of the world. And also we're interested in supporting girls' education and activities. So this is a girls' basketball tournament that you see is the last picture. So I'm going to shift to saying something about how this is connected to the idea of food sovereignty. But first going to read this quote about food sovereignty, which says, "It is not a one-size-fits-all approach, but an expansive set of principles, policies, and practices. It is grounded in the belief that everyone has the right to healthy, sustainably produced food, and that people and nations must have democratic control over their food and agricultural systems." And this is from Harvesting Justice. And so what I thought was important to be thinking about as I engaged food sovereignty work is the local circumstances, the local conditions. And so I'm going to pause again here, and I want people to again engage with someone near you. You can even get up if you didn't sit near anyone. But the question, the invitation is to think about a local food product or practice. And so, sometimes you know that if you're from a particular place, there's some food thing that's unique to that place. And in what ways does that food tradition or food practice demonstrate the importance of local control over agriculture and food? So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to talk about that. See if you all can think of a local food tradition and understand why it's important that local control exists for that tradition to continue. All right, so I know the conversations are going well. So I'd love to hear just a couple of traditions in the room. And if we can hear from some people who we haven't heard from yet. So just maybe one or two people. Claire's getting lots of great exercise today.
So, when you say it's like local traditions, so we're in that seafood plethora, like the seafood, sewer, so that right now, plants, squid, all of that sort of thing, and like the local businesses that profit off. We would really see, but that's the best that you can get, so right.
Thank you for sharing. Anyone else have a local food tradition?
I was trying to look up and then, since I was I was looking about how like the brand Moya, often, like when I buy them, they usually sort of where it's exported from. But every time I'm like back in the country, I said, I just like, I can just eat the beans from like the plant itself, and I just boil it and let it sit outside, so it kind of like, it goes land here, I don't know what to say. And then I just eat them with another thing, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's interesting thinking if you're from a place that's, really well known for something or even a region. I mean, some of you may know the phrase banana republic and have a sense of sort of the political weight of what that's meant for, countries, including Honduras, in terms of United Fruit Company and stuff like that. This is not a conversation about that, but feel free to explore that on your own. So what I want to say here is I want to talk about these food sovereignty principles, and this is a list of principles developed at a 2007 Forum for Food Sovereignty in Mali, West Africa. And there are 6 principles here. And I'll just talk a little bit about each of them and how I see them sort of in the context of this transnational project that was connecting Black women's food sovereignty work. One is a focus on food for people. Certainly in the Garifuna community, like the importance of areba as a traditional food staple was indisputable. I mean, even the way that people talked about the traditions that accompanied it, whether or not there were songs that women learned from their grandmothers while they were grinding down the cassava, practice of peeling cassava in community with other women. There was a lot of tradition around this, sort of creation of this food practice. And in any house that you go in, you won't always notice it if you're not accustomed to looking for it, but there's always in some corner a stash of areba that people can go to when they, when there is no other food. And in fact, often people would send it on buses to students in the city so that they could have it, both to sell to Garifuna people without land, but also to eat themselves. So certainly a focus on food for people there. And then the entire project of Tabasamu for this initiative was to think about all the different ways that women can grow, whether or not they have a lot of access to land. So, I get reports back saying, we can just do this in anybody who has a sack can grow. And I'd see, images of that kind of work. So the idea was to make sure that women were in a position to feed their families. The second principle here is valuing food providers, which I think brings attention to women both as food growers, but also distributors. I'm going to read another quote here from Harvesting Justice. Women produce 60 to 80% of all food, both as subsistence farmers and as agricultural wage laborers. They are the primary providers for the majority of the world's 925 million hungry people, obtaining food, collecting firewood and water, and cooking. And yet they have less access to land and the resources necessary to grow on it than their male counterparts. Inequitable distribution of land, labor, and resources leaves farming women triply burdened by work in the fields, in the home, and in society. And again, this is from Field and Bales 2013, Harvesting Justice. The next principle that we'll look at is localizing food systems. Certainly in the rural areas of Honduras, in this particular community, local communities were in charge of everything related to the food, in part because the government didn't have the reach to regulate a lot. But it was something that I noticed in the relationship between, when I was thinking about the two groups together, was how government regulation in Mwanza would actually result in women without financial means having access to water cut off because they were not able to pay their bills. And so one of the things here, that's a part of that project, was just paying the bills to make sure people could have water. Next principle is making decisions locally. And I think this is a really interesting one to think about in the context of transnational work, of transnational Black feminist work. Because the question is, how does one engage in a way that doesn't disrupt local decision-making structures, that doesn't, in a way that's undesirable, disrupt power structures? And I say undesirable because there are some ways in which you might be intending to disrupt local power structures. And part of what I think about when I think about the importance of local governance and structure and control is the work of Ashanti Reese, who talks about geographies of self-reliance. And I'm going to read a quote. This is from Black Food Geographies, which is focused on Washington, D.C. But the quote is this: geographies of self-reliance reveal different yet related experiences, namely how the everyday lives of residents disrupt the dichotomy between death and survival to reveal how hope and visions for an uncertain future animate decisions on where to shop and who to support and inspire small-scale food justice. So I think that one of the things that I was, sort of exploring and looking at was thinking about the ability of communities to really control all aspects of providing their communities with food. And so in the rural Garifuna communities, there was, again, a lot of focus on local decision-making, and also at the same time, increasingly, the patriarchal norms of the larger Honduran society were impacting the respect for women's historical role in the matrifocal, historically matrifocal Garifuna society. And so I noted in the groups that make cassava, and there were some women's group, and there were some groups that were not exclusively women, and there were certainly sort of power dynamics that pointed to that influence. In Mwanza, decision-making and action planning were complicated by, I would say, a longer history of sort of indigenous patriarchy in a number of the different ethnic groups that were represented within the group, and that there was really a certain urgency around creating an alternative so that the girls in the community would not be vulnerable to child marriage, to other forms of exploitation. And so there was really a lot of dedication in the work there. And again, sense of urgency. The next principle is thinking about building knowledge and skills. And I'm going to read here a quote, a lot of Black feminist inspiration here from Monica White's Freedom Farmers. And she writes about these cooperative structures in the history of Black agricultural cooperatives. She says, open quote, "In these cooperatives, Black workers drew on the skills on the skills they had used in growing cash crops for white landowners to create organizations that spoke to the liberatory impulses of the day. the oppressive forces of economic discrimination, as well as their dire needs. They grew food crops for themselves as a basis for political autonomy. And what I think about when I think about that, and of course, connections across geographies around women who are growing, is how important in the Gerifuna community it was to pass down the traditions that surrounded Areba work. This has been compounded by migration of young women professionals to urban areas. So when you see the pictures from Honduras, my pictures from Honduras, often you don't see younger women in those. You see children, but you don't see that sort of middle group, the sort of women in their 20s. And so part of my ongoing work is supporting the documentation of that process. And in Tabusamu, there was definitely, in Mwanza, there was definitely a focus on working with girls and educating them for economic autonomy. And then the last principle here is about working with nature. Grassroots International, just a nonprofit organization, describes, this is a quote from them, "Food sovereignty seeks to heal the planet so that the planet may heal us, and rejects methods that harm beneficial ecosystem functions that depend on energy-intensive monocultures and livestock factories, destructive fishing practices, and other industrialized production methods which damage the environment and contribute to global warming." And I just say that to just think about sort of what food sovereignty activists are trying to advance. And I've already mentioned that Gerifuna culture, especially around the Areba work, is full of ritual and ceremony that builds deep relationships with nature, that acknowledges that there's a lot to learn from rivers, from land, from forest. And in Tabasamu, from Mwanza, there were, once again, many different indigenous traditions. Again, as I mentioned before, thinking about how to best engage the question of water and the relationship with water. They were quite close to Lake Victoria, one of the African Great Lakes, but again, because of the regulation of government, we're often not able to have regular water access. And so I'm just gonna say, the time check, okay. I'm gonna say a little bit about how the framing of a transnational Black feminist framework is implicated in this work, in this engagement. And I'll just say that I use the word transnational in a really specific way. So I always just take a moment to distinguish between the transnational, global, and international. So ultimately, when I say international, I'm talking relationships, interactions between governments. That's often where people focus in the field of international relations. When I think about the word global, I'm often focused on larger global structures. Think about rights, you can think about United Nations. What I look about the term transnational is that it is disruptive. It is many different things. It is individuals and organizations interacting across borders in a way that doesn't have to be organized in that way. It is, it has the power to organize itself and challenge both government structures and global governance norms. And then, as may already be apparent in some of the things that I've said, part of the reason that I call it a transnational Black feminist tradition is because it's rooted in really strong legacies of Black feminist work, which some of which I've already cited. I'm talking about food geographies, but also I want to be clear that the transnational feminists whose work I benefit from aren't work, when I talk about Black feminist circles, they aren't racially segregated spaces. So I want to talk about Black feminist collaboration, especially with other transnational feminists of color. And so that is often often informing the concepts that I'm engaging sometimes these women have referred to themselves historically as third world women. You can talk about subaltern communities. We can talk about Chicana queer feminist. But I want to in particular name sort of legacies of the work of people like Chandra Mohanty and Linda Carty, who've done some focused work on decolonizing knowledge in the academy and beyond. And so that's sort of part of the legacy being engaged even in the naming of this. So 5 guiding principles that I'll rush through: intersectionality. Raise your hand if you've heard of intersectionality. It's like, yeah, everybody in the room. So I'm not sure what to say here, except for that it has long legs, that it's, people often talk about the Combahee River Collective and the importance of them, Boston-based lesbian group that wrote a powerful statement. Also, people refer to Kimberly Crenshaw's coining of the term, but there are a lot of different uses. And what I thought was important here was just thinking about all the things that come together in these particular contexts. What does it mean that I'm engaging a Garifuna matrifocal culture in a Honduran patriarchal state? What's coming up against other things and acting together in the creation of the circumstances. Similarly, I want to say just briefly here the importance of engaging local concepts, not just local activity. And so what does it mean to think about race on the African continent and, and not just try to transport racial concepts that come from the US to the continent. And here I just want to highlight the work of Dr. Harper Shipman, who talks about erasing Africa, and then racing Africa in IR, international relations. And so someone who talks about what it means to examine, to be looking close enough to see racial constructions all over. When I think about scholar activism, I think about the long legacy of Black feminist anthropologists who have long talked about the importance of not just studying harm or various phenomena, poverty, for example, but to feel an ethical responsibility, a professional responsibility to intervene. Here, I think about the work of Erin McLaurin, especially. But one of the things that was going on for me and thinking about this is a challenge to do that, but in a way that respects local decision-making and leaves intact local systems. I think there's always a kind of nuance there. And I also want to make a point here that I hope people will engage and sort of challenge and questions. I argue that this can be a feminist intervention without everybody involved self-identifying as feminist. That I think that it's important that feminist work not be exclusive to feminists, that it's not that kind of project, and that it's not a proselytizing one or one of converting people to something, but they can improve circumstances, that it can alter gender dynamics in a way that transcends that kind of thinking. Solidarity, and again here I'm linking to the work of people like Chandra Mohanty and also Bell Hooks, in making the point that solidarity is not sameness, that you have to have difference in order to be engaging in solidarity. In fact, it is about, how you cross the difference in a way that is enduring and demonstrates an ongoing commitment to the work of someone else's struggle. And so I especially saw that in Tabasamu, even, in the Garifuna community, in that group in Lucha y Esperanza, there was a shared ethno-racial identity there, but I think that there was a lot to observe in Tabasamu, especially because the person who I was most directly interacting with was a Kenyan national working in Tanzania with the multi-ethnic women's group. So there was a lot there to think about and to consider. And next is attention to borders and boundaries. Again, I've already said a little bit about what it means that I am, both an international relations scholar, but also doing transnational work, which for me means a sort of recognition of long-standing boundaries and borders that, existed before these states did, the places that we think of now when we name countries. And so that was a really important part. Of course, I'm linking here to the work of Ray Anzaldúa, about borderlands, and others who talk about these sort of thick areas where cultures meet, where there is migration and transition and crossings, expansions, disappearances. In particular, when I think about the Garifuna community on the coastline, I think about it as a place that in many ways the Hundreds is sort of abandoned as labeled as a kind of narco traffic zone that they don't have the reach to sort of manage. And so what then emerges in that kind of zone was something to consider. And then I've already said a little bit about Mwanza sort of being very close to the water, but also very far because of sort of the heavy regulation of government. But what are the politics of that sort of zone of being close and being far, or having a central government, but then really not. And then this last one, radically transparent positionality, is something that I often I ask people to engage and consider, because you probably have heard people talk about positionality before. Raise your hand if you have. Okay, so if I have the room. So often it's, people will say something about race, gender, class, and so that they can situate themselves more broadly around a topic. But what I'm pushing people to do here is to say more than they usually say, and say something slightly different. So consider the context of the case to figure out, what's relevant for the case. So if we're talking about mining and your family owns a mine, it'd be useful to share that in that context. And also to do it in ways that remove the smoke and mirrors of the academy about how people are accessing research sites, that really sort of demystify some of that work. And sometimes what I name in the context of my work in the Garifuna communities is my link to really one person who gave me access to their home and their family. Were it not for that, I probably wouldn't have been able to do that project. But part of what came to mind when I was thinking about this transnational project was I began to think about my ongoing relationship with these communities and how my own rearing, as what I would describe a middle-class rearing, has a sort of particular relationship to the work. I am not someone who lived in rural areas or lived in poverty, and I find myself trying to close the gap in ways that are both radical in terms of sort of a willingness to give from, some people describe it as substance rather than surplus. But I think that the way that I do it gives the appearance that I'm going to always have more to give, which is, I think, is one, not the case, but it's also something that I can't prepare people for, that one day I won't get the funding for the fellowship, one, I won't get a grant. And so thinking about how to sort of make that clear or how to share parts of that is part of the reason why I go back and share parts of the story. So I'm going to ask you to reflect on it, and hopefully it'll come out in some of the question and answer. But what I ask people to think about here is their personal relationship with privilege. I'm hoping people online and also in the room think about it, and how you're sort of troubling your habits about how you relate across difference. I would just breeze through these last couple of slides. I've already mentioned that I currently am education director at Global Village Farms. We have a community farm day this Saturday. I mean, this Sunday, in case you want to come out. But so just thinking about what it's like to work with Indigenous people here, not just elsewhere, and to be making those connections across place, and also what it means to be working within the context of a non-federally recognized Indigenous community here is part of what I'm thinking about, part of what's important. I'll also just say really quickly, in where I started, which is about transnational legacies. This is a picture of my godfather who died in August, the month before my grandmother passed last year. His name is Roland Freeman. Look him up. He's a well-known photographer, photo documentarian. And part of what he taught me is sort of continuing in the work that I'm doing about the power of images when language and other things are not shared. The importance of framing, documenting diasporic Black folk culture and traditions, attending to questions of racialized and gendered hierarchies of power. And so just wanted to honor him in that work. And then just say thank you. I can say more here if there are questions, but just thank you to the Consortium on Gender, Security, and Human Rights for inviting me here. I am creating a container to hold some of this work, food sovereignty, reparations, and abolition work. And so if you want to that work, you can email me to be on the email list as founder at Sadie Collective. Sadie is ideas spelled backwards, so sadiecollective.org. And then there are a bunch of different references. I know if you're out there, you can't see it, but politics of citation is important. Yeah. And so I think we're gonna, I don't know if I'm moving to take questions or.
So please join me in thanking Dr. Quick Hall for such an illuminating and engaged talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I would also like to thank the consortium for all the work that took to organize this event, Carol and Claire, and the support of many of these interns and supporters who have been instrumental in some of these talks that we do. I also want to remind you to the speaker series that we have. You do have two kind of papers on your desk. And look, please check our speaker series. You will find it on the website. We do have one in March on post-colonial feminism and climate change on March 28th. And there is another one coming in April, on April 11, that deal with eco-feminist approaches. So please check in and come to that. I also would like to thank many of the students who are attending this today. Please make sure that you sign the attendance sheets that are at the front. And also please remember to fill the surveys and feedback. It's available, as I mentioned earlier, for you here in the room, as well as it will pops up for the Zoom audience. Thank you very much. We'll take a Q&A for now. We have about 50 minutes, so.
Don't be shy. Okay. 3 hands popped up.
About the work that you do with James, like explain that.
Sure. So this is a Mellon-funded grant. It's a 2-year project focused on anti-carceral. It's an anti-carceral collaboratory. So the idea is to work not just within the academy, across academies, and with community activists who have been trying to end prisons. So there are 3 partner organizations, Family for Justice's Healing, New Beginnings, Reentry Center, and Sisters Unchained. And so working with all 3 of those organizations to advance the work and to make sure that we don't end up in prison. And feel free to add, if you have more questions about sort of abolitionist politics, I can.
So we first asked about like specifically down the Black manuscript
we decided to come together and order in bulk, at that market specifically to keep it in business. And we kind of developed a transactional relationship and overall, we kind of found ways to have some food sovereignty. But I guess the question is, what do you feel like is the best way to mobilize just the general community in Boston to get on the same page for everyone?
So I think about that, the part of the food sovereignty quote that I read that says there's no one size fits all. And often I think it's tricky because often people will see me doing something and think that it's a suggestion, but I think we should do all the things. So I think we should, buy in bulk when that's useful. I think we should create worker cooperatives when and where we can do that. I think we should have land when we can do that. I think we should have hydroponic growing systems where we can't do that. I mean, I could go on. I mean, you get the idea, but I think that sometimes when people, it's fine to focus on a big thing and to decide that there's a strategy for the big thing. But I also want to suggest that there are many ways of oppressing people and many ways of alienating people from the land where they are. And I want there to be as many strategies for engaging that as there are ways, more strategies for engaging them than there are ways to represent. I'm paraphrasing, I believe, in Elizabeth Spellman quote here about the importance of having as many ways to sort of respond to oppression as there are ways to oppress. Yeah. And also that's why I come to stuff like this, so people can suggest things that I never thought of and we can do it.
Thank you so much. My question is, I think about Africa, I know that they are very strongly consider themselves and they descend from include African peoples and indigenous minds of the area. And I sort of wonder how we position academia work with regards to indigenous repatriation. And some of the work that's being done around here, for example, 5 days from the repatriation collective and other people, where this highlighting that actually first peoples,
Yeah, I would say well aligned, almost to the point of it being slightly controversial. I mean, because I think that, and I'll say why, because I'm also a reparationist. And so, oftentimes the conversations around in Black communities that are not well, let me just quick terminology thing here. So I use indigenous when I'm not talking to anthropologists, but sometimes anthropologists use a phrase called autochthonous to refer to the people who were there before the drawing of the state lines. It has less of the sort of ethnic suggestion than the word indigenous. And so I just want to be clear that part of the reason why I'm talking about the Getty Fund as a Black indigenous community is because they were there before the state of Honduras existed as a thing. And so I think that it's important to have serious conversations among Black people who are not there before the states were created and who are talking about in the Americas the desire for land to have some serious conversations about indigenous folks and what it means to, I describe it as negotiate with thieves around questions of land. And so I actually think that we should all be engaging Native folks of a land. And I'm going to say whether or not the federal government recognizes them, and we can think about what that history is and engage in more than acknowledgement, but a praxis that is about rematriation, indigenous land back, and also the decommodification of land and thinking about what it means to have rights of nature in a relationship with the earth that does not presume that it is here for extraction. Yeah.
related question from Zoom.
Sure.
To ask, the communities are not always collaborating in food sovereignty projects because of other projects, like mining or energy products. What do you think about that?
That is a yes, candidate, but certain questions is what I think and something given. I know.
Okay. So there's just a suggestion in the room that we take a couple of different questions. Can I answer this one quick? Can you just, it's in the chat, or can you just read it one more time? Just, I want to make sure I don't lose track of it.
The communities not always collaborating in food sovereignty projects, food projects, like mining or energy products. What do you think about it? And then they added, it is usually the case that transnational business firms thrive on farms.
Yeah, so I mean, and I think I read one of these quotes earlier, but that, you know, the food sovereignty principles, the idea of food sovereignty really believes in privileges, local decision-making, local systems. And so we're talking about multinational corporations, you know, buying land, running, you know, all kinds of large plants that often have long environmental impacts. Right now, I'm thinking about petrochemical plants and what some people refer to as Cancer Alley. I was just engaging with some folks from Louisiana recently, but I am rooting in a really specific politic, and I don't suggest that it's not controversial. It is controversial, you know, like it comes up, everything that is, I would make a distinction here again between multinational and transnational, but any case, but so those large corporate interests that are coming into local communities, I'm not aligned with that.
Thank you so much. Dr. Paul, for your experience. From the beginning, from the opening and, you know, incorporating. I'm wondering if that has been kind of integrated within the local decision making. What has come about in your documentation so far in terms of making sure that the young people kind of stay involved and maybe pass down this legacy?
Sure, and I just want to make a clarification. So it's in the Garifuna community that the middle group is kind of, you know, not present as much. And oh, I'm sorry, were we gonna take, is this one of the ones where we're taking multiple questions? Okay. But I can also answer quickly. I think it'll be okay. No, I mean, sometimes you pile up questions, and I mean, if people are good at remember, but I want to make sure that people, and I can hang out. And also I have a small photo gift for people who came in the room for online. Oh, so I'm just gonna volunteer somebody. So these are images, and just take, you know, one of the images, but they're images, you know, from the community, the email that I had posted on here, but this is just like, just take one and pass it for the folks who are here. They're different images, so you won't get the same person. Don't go through and look and pick, just share with a friend. You got to make a friend if you didn't get the picture that you put. But so I just want to say that, yeah, it's tough when that middle group is gone. And it's not, it's the kind of thing where it's, I am invested in supporting the documentation of that culture, but that happens often, that a tradition or disappears without being documented. Oh, I'm sorry, can you make sure you get the people in the front first, just in case we run out? See? I told people to come to the front. Not everybody came to the front. So hopefully we'll see what happens to the back. But so I just, I think that it's an ongoing struggle, but I want to also point out another nuance. The folks who have the resources to travel don't always want the rural stories told. They are not as eloquently framed. They are a bit more rustic, and in a politics of representation, they may not be invested in that story being told, and so there can be a sort of tension in relationship to someone like me who's committed to telling those women's stories because I want, you know, my auntie's work to be known, even if it's not glamorous, even if it's not, you know, particularly the image that people want. And I'll just say one example is the songs that they sung, they used to sing traditionally, the Grana Saba. The songs to be characterized as raunchy in some circles. And so, you know, just thinking about what that means.
Yes, I only had a small question.
Yeah.
That was for clarification. So you mentioned earlier on, we were talking about a statistic of, food production, done by women. You said it was 68%.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know if that was, it's a hard number or percentage to reduce full context. Are we talking about worldwide or specifically within? I was trying to or
It's global staff from the field and which is I recommend it. And I think there might be an online version of that text, but focus on food sovereignty work around the world. And, you know, I'm sure, I mean, that's a decade ago. So, you know, we could see what that means today. Also, I'm gonna just say, I'm gonna hang out. So like, also, if you were in the back and you didn't get a thing, I do have some extras, but you gotta come and talk to me now, so. But I'm around. I know folks are, you know, trying to close out, but anybody, there any last minute? Or I don't know who's closing out. Oh yeah, go ahead and say the question. Yes.
So,
And feel free to get up if you need to leave. It's okay. I'm not, no, I won't. I'll assume it's because you had a serious appointment. So, yeah.
For you, to wish, to those that include the different classes. So even though they're women, their values can, thoughts are different. So, how long did you take to study this to boost?
Well, let me just say, even within the same place, the politics can be very different, right? So you get, I mean, as soon as you have one family and two people, often you have a conflict. So I mean, I think that kind of nuance is always there. And my goal with any project of these is to bring people together around values. So even if, you know, you don't get along around other things, my goal is to talk about how can we create food systems that will feed people, which we all need to survive. And that's where I focus. But it isn't intended to suggest that there's in conflict and controversy, which there always is. Yeah. But that's part of the commitment, the long-term engagement. Yeah. And I think there's and again, also somebody tell me, because I'll just stay here, but let me know if you all want to close out to meet with people one-on-one.
Working. Okay. In Honduras, there's like a short representation of like the younger generation. And I wanted to know if you have seen a specific reason why. Is it like a disinterest of the younger generation not wanting to do it, or is it just like it's not the same?
It's a combination of things. I mean, I don't know that farming is a glorified profession. I mean, so, also there are resources in the city that aren't in the rural areas. I mean, if you want the city all the time, or, you know, you wanna be able to stream movies, you know, whatever things you're interested in. But I also want to say that sometimes people make the hard line between urban and rural, and I think that it's important to recognize that people move back and forth between those different contexts depending on what's happening in their lives. And so it's really important to me to recognize a sort of cyclical relationship between Garifuna people in the urban and rural areas, that it's not a hard line that people don't cross. Everybody comes home to the village for holidays, because what are you gonna do in the city? I mean, like, that's where, you know, there are a lot of ceremonies and parties and, you know, feria, like they have all like night. I mean, you can't get in the city what you get in the village, or in, you know, Semana Santa, or like, you know, big holidays. Yeah. All right.
So thanks again, Dr. Quick Hall. Thanks to everybody here and on Zoom. And so for those who are in the room, you have the luxury of sticking a bit longer if you would like to converse with Dr. Quick Hall. But thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, online people.
I just like a picture. I gave everybody else, but I forgot myself.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Okay. I gotta do something to it real quick.